I spent 13 years in the shadows, taking down cartels and dismantling terrorist cells, all to build a paradise for the woman who gave me life. But when I finally walked through the iron gates of the estate I paid for, I did not find my mother living like a queen. I found her on her knees, scrubbing the driveway of my own house, wearing a maid uniform that smelled of bleach and old sweat. She looked up at me with hollow eyes and asked if I was the delivery man. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not the soldier, but the son. I did not scream. I did not cry. I calmly reached into my pocket, touched the burner phone that connects directly to my private security team, and whispered 3 words. It is time. Before I tell you how I dismantled my brother life piece by piece, let me know in the comments if you believe that family betrayal is the unforgivable sin. Like and subscribe if you want to see justice served cold. My name is Conrad Steele. I am 69 years old, and for the last decade, the world believed I was a ghost. They were right. I was a ghost who wired $15,000 a month to a bank account in the Hamptons, ensuring my mother Beatrice would spend her final years in absolute luxury. The flight from the extraction point in Syria to New York was long, but the anticipation kept me awake. I pictured her sitting in the rose garden I designed, holding a cup of tea, maybe reading one of those romance novels she loved. I pictured the tears of joy when she saw that her eldest son had finally come home for good. The reality hit me like a sniper round to the chest. I stood before the 12-foot-tall iron gates of the mansion at 14 Ocean View Drive. The Atlantic wind bit at my face, but I did not feel the cold. I felt the heat of confusion. I pressed my hand against the biometric scanner panel concealed in the stone pillar. This was a military-grade system I had installed myself 13 years ago. It should have scanned my palm, recognized my DNA, and swung open with a welcome message. Instead, the light flashed an angry red. Access denied. User unknown. I tried the keypad. I punched in the master override code, a code only I knew. Access denied. Someone had not just changed the locks. They had wiped me from the system entirely. I was a stranger in the fortress I built. I pressed the intercom button. The static hissed for a long moment before a voice answered. It was not the crisp, professional voice of a housekeeper or the warm tone of my mother. It was a tired, broken voice that sounded like dry leaves scraping against concrete. Hello? Deliveries are at the back. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew that voice, but it lacked the strength I remembered. Mom, it is me. Open the gate. There was a long silence. Then the small pedestrian door integrated into the main gate clicked and creaked open. I stepped through, expecting an embrace. I expected recognition. Instead, I saw a tiny, frail woman standing in the shadow of the hedges. She wore a black uniform with a white apron that was stained with grease and dirt. Her silver hair, which used to be styled in elegant waves, was pulled back in a messy bun, secured with a rubber band. She held a heavy bucket of soapy water in one hand and a scrubbing brush in the other. I stopped 5 feet away from her. The duffel bag slipped from my shoulder and hit the gravel. Mom, I whispered. She squinted at me, tilting her head. Her eyes were cloudy. She looked at my worn field jacket, my combat boots, and the scar running down my left cheek. There was no spark of memory in her gaze, just fear. A primal, ingrained fear of making a mistake. Sir, the master does not like vagrants in the yard. If you are here for the landscaping job, the tools are in the shed. Please do not let him see you. He is in a bad mood today. The master. She called someone the master in a house that belonged to me, a house where she was supposed to be the matriarch. I took a step closer, and that was when I saw the bruise. It was a dark purple mark blooming on her right wrist just below the sleeve of her uniform. It was not an accidental bruise. It was the shape of fingers. Someone had grabbed her, hard. I reached out to touch her hand, and she flinched, pulling back as if I were about to strike her. "I am sorry, sir. I am sorry. I will get back to work. Please do not tell him I was talking." I looked down at her feet. This was the detail that nearly brought me to my knees. She was wearing a pair of Salvatore Ferragamo loafers. I recognized them because I had bought them for her in Rome 15 years ago during a brief leave. They were Italian leather, soft as butter, meant for walking in museums, not for scrubbing pavement. Now they were ruined. The leather was cracked and peeling. The sole of the left shoe was separating from the upper, held together by a strip of silver duct tape. My mother was wearing taped shoes in a $5.9 million estate. I opened my mouth to speak to tell her again who I was, but the roar of an engine cut through the air. A sleek black Porsche Panamera turned the corner and sped toward the gate. The driver honked the horn aggressively, a long blaring sound that made my mother jump. She scrambled out of the way, clutching her bucket, spilling soapy water onto her taped shoes. The gate swung open for the car. The Porsche rolled up the driveway and screeched to a halt right next to where I stood. The window rolled down. The man in the driver's seat wore a suit that cost more than my first car, but it fit him poorly, straining at the waist. His face was puffy, flushed with the redness of expensive wine and high blood pressure. Douglas, my younger brother. The boy I had protected from bullies in high school. The man I had entrusted with the power of attorney over my assets because I thought family was sacred. He looked me up and down, taking in my rough appearance. He did not see the lethal efficiency of a veteran. He saw a bum. He saw a failure. Well, look what the cat dragged in. Douglas sneered. His voice was thick with mock surprise. "We thought you were dead, Conrad. Or in prison. Honestly, we were betting on prison." The passenger door opened. A woman stepped out. Pamela, my sister-in-law. She was thin, sharp angles and heavy makeup, carrying a designer handbag like a shield. She looked at me with pure disgust, wrinkling her nose as if I smelled of manure. "Doug! Why is he here?" she whined. "We have guests coming this weekend. We cannot have him looming around looking like a homeless person. It brings down the property value." "Conrad," Douglas said, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. "Listen. If you are here for money, you are wasting your time. The trust fund is tied up in investments, high-level stuff you would not understand. We are tight on cash right now." I looked at the Porsche. I looked at Pamela diamond earrings. I looked at my mother standing by the hedges, head bowed, waiting for permission to move. "I am not here for money," I said. My voice was raspy, unused to speaking English after months in the desert. "I just came home." "Home?" Pamela laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "This is not your home anymore, Conrad. You abandoned this family years ago. You disappeared. We had to pick up the pieces. We had to take care of Beatrice. Take care of her." I looked at my mother again. She was shivering in the cold wind. "She does not look taken care of," I said quietly. Douglas' face darkened. He opened the car door and stepped out, trying to use his height to intimidate me. He was 2 inches shorter and 50 pounds softer than me. "She is sick, Conrad. Dementia. She insists on cleaning. It is a coping mechanism. The doctors said to let her do it. It keeps her calm. If we stop her, she gets violent." Lies. I could smell the lie on his breath, mixed with the scent of peppermint and cigars. But I needed to get inside. I needed to see the extent of the rot before I cut it out. If I attacked him now, the police would come. I had no ID, no access to my accounts yet. I would be the aggressor. I needed intel. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. I lowered my head. I let my shoulders slump. I adopted the posture of a defeated man. "I have nowhere else to go, Doug," I said. "Just let me stay for a few days, until I get on my feet." Douglas exchanged a look with Pamela. She rolled her eyes and sighed. Fine. But he is not staying in the guest wing. That is for the investors. He can sleep in the storage room behind the garage, Douglas said. It has a cot. And Conrad, nothing in this world is free. If you stay, you work. The gardener quit last week. The hedges need trimming and the pool needs cleaning. I nodded slowly. Understood. Good. Now get out of my sight. And take your mother to the kitchen. Tell her to hurry up with dinner. We are starving. Douglas and Pamela marched toward the front door, the grand double mahogany doors I had imported from Brazil. They did not hold the door for my mother. They let it slam shut in her face. I walked over to Beatrice. I gently took the heavy bucket from her hand. Let me help you, I said. She looked at me, her eyes wide with confusion. You are very kind, sir. But be careful. If Justin sees you helping, he will make fun of you. Who is Justin? I asked, though I knew, my grandson. She whispered. He is spirited. We walked to the back of the house to the servants' entrance. The kitchen was a chaotic mess of expensive ingredients. A prime rib roast sat on the counter next to empty bottles of vintage Bordeaux. But there was no chef, just my mother. She began to move around the kitchen with muscle memory, seasoning the meat, checking the potatoes. Her hands shook violently. I watched her struggle to lift a heavy cast iron pot. I stepped in and lifted it for her, placing it on the stove. Thank you, she murmured. You look like my son. He was strong like you. But he never came back. I gripped the edge of the granite counter until my knuckles turned white. I am here, Mom. I wanted to scream. I am right here. But I stayed silent. I had to be a ghost a little longer. Night fell. The house lit up like a beacon of wealth. I sat in the corner of the kitchen at a small, wobbly table designated for staff. My dinner was a slice of dry bread and a glass of tap water. In the dining room, the chandelier crystal clinked. I could hear laughter, boisterous, drunken laughter. Bring the soup, Douglas bellowed from the other room. My mother picked up the silver tureen. It was heavy, filled with boiling hot pumpkin bisque. She smoothed her apron, took a deep breath, and pushed through the swinging door. I followed, staying in the shadows of the doorframe. The dining room was magnificent. Silk curtains, velvet chairs, gold-rimmed plates. Douglas sat at the head of the table. Pamela was on his right, scrolling through her phone. And on his left sat Justin. My nephew was 25 years old now. He wore a designer hoodie and headphones around his neck. His face was pale from lack of sunlight, his eyes glued to a tablet screen where a gambling app was flashing neon colors. My mother approached the table. Her arms were trembling under the weight of the tureen. Soup is served, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She moved to serve Justin first. As she leaned in, trying to ladle the soup into his bowl, Justin did not look up. He stretched his legs out under the table, kicking his foot out in a sharp, deliberate motion. It was not an accident. I saw his eyes dart down. He hooked his foot around my mother's ankle. She gasped. She tried to catch her balance, but the heavy tureen shifted. She fell forward hard. The tureen hit the floor with a deafening crash. Hot orange soup exploded everywhere, splashing onto the Persian rug, onto the table legs, and onto my mother's apron. She cried out in pain as the hot liquid soaked into her clothes. She landed on her knees amidst the broken porcelain shards. "Oh my God!" Pamela shrieked, jumping up from her chair. "Not the rug! That is a distinct antique. You clumsy old hag!" Justin burst out laughing. He laughed so hard he choked on his wine. "Did you see that? She went down like a sack of bricks. Nice moves, Grandma." Douglas slammed his fist on the table. "Mother, can you not do one thing right? Look at this mess. You are useless, absolutely useless." No one moved to help her. Not her son, not her grandson, not her daughter-in-law. My mother was on the floor picking up shards of hot porcelain with her bare hands, cutting her fingers, tears streaming down her face. "I am sorry. I am sorry. I will clean it. Please do not be mad." The rage that flooded my veins was cold. It was the cold calculation of a man who knows exactly how to end a life in 3 seconds. I looked at the butter knife on the table near me. I could throw it. I could put it through Douglas' hand before he blinked. I could break Justin's neck before he stopped laughing. But that would be too easy. That would be mercy. And they did not deserve mercy. They deserved total destruction. I stepped into the light. The room went quiet. I walked over to my mother. I ignored the screaming Pamela and the laughing Justin. I knelt down into the puddle of hot soup, ruining my combat pants. I took the sharp porcelain from her bleeding hands. "Leave it," I said. My voice was low, a growl that vibrated in the room. I helped her stand. She was shaking uncontrollably. "Get her out of here, Conrad," Douglas yelled. "And you clean this up. If there is a stain by morning, I am kicking you both out on the street." I turned to look at my brother. For 1 second, I let the mask slip. I let him see the eyes of the man who had survived black sights and torture. Douglas flinched. He actually leaned back in his chair, the color draining from his face. He did not know why he was scared, but his survival instinct had just kicked in. I guided my mother out of the room. I took her down the hall, past the guest rooms she was not allowed to enter, down a narrow flight of stairs to the basement. This was where they kept her. A damp, unfinished concrete room next to the furnace. There was a single mattress on the floor, with a thin wool blanket. No windows, no heat, just a picture of me on a small crate she used as a nightstand. I sat her down on the mattress. I found a first aid kit in my bag and bandaged her cut fingers. She watched me silently. "You have gentle hands for a big man," she whispered. My Conrad had gentle hands too. I waited until she fell asleep, exhausted by the trauma. Then I stood up. I walked to the darkest corner of the basement. I pulled out the burner phone. I typed a text message to Jared, my second in command, the man who could hack into the Pentagon if I asked him to. The text was simple. Asset compromised. Hostiles confirmed. Initiate Protocol 0. I want to know where every single cent has gone. Scan the house. Scan their phones. Prepare the legal team. We go to war at dawn. I hit send. Upstairs, I could hear the television blaring and the sound of champagne corks popping. They were celebrating. Let them celebrate. Let them enjoy their last night as kings. Because tomorrow the ghost is coming for them. And I am bringing hell with me. The air grew colder with every step I took down the narrow wooden staircase. It smelled of mildew and damp earth, a sharp contrast to the lavender-scented air conditioning that circulated through the upper levels of the mansion. The stairs creaked under my combat boots, a sound that seemed deafening in the silence. My mother held onto my arm, her grip frail and trembling. I could feel the heat radiating from her skin, the fever of exhaustion and trauma. We reached the bottom. This was not a guest room. It was not even a proper servant quarter. It was the unfinished utility basement. The concrete floor was bare and stained with years of moisture. In the corner, a massive furnace hummed and rattled like a dying beast, filling the space with the smell of heating oil. I looked around, trying to process the reality before me. There were no windows here. No natural light. Just a single naked bulb hanging from a wire, casting harsh shadows against the cinder block walls. In the far corner, pushed up against the damp wall, was a twin mattress. It sat directly on the concrete. There was no bed frame. The sheets were gray with age and the wool blanket was thin and moth-eaten. This was where Beatrice Steele, the legal owner of a $5.9 million estate, laid her head at night. I guided her to the mattress. She sat down heavily, letting out a sigh that sounded more like a whimper. I knelt before her and reached for her feet. "Let me take these off, Mom," I whispered. She did not resist. I peeled the silver duct tape off the sole of the Ferragamo loafer. The leather was ruined stiff from the water and cracked from abuse. I slid the shoe off and saw her foot. It was swollen red and covered in blisters. My heart hammered against my ribs, a slow, painful rhythm. I had bought these shoes to celebrate her 65th birthday. I remembered her laughing, saying they were too fancy for the garden. Now they were the only shoes she owned. I lifted her legs onto the mattress and covered her with the scratchy blanket. I took off my own field jacket, heavy and warm, and spread it over her. She curled into a ball facing the wall. "Conrad," she mumbled, her eyes already closing. "Do not let Douglas know I broke the bowl. He will take it out of my allowance." "Sleep, Mom," I said softly. "Nobody is going to hurt you tonight." I waited until her breathing evened out. I waited until the only sound in the room was the rhythmic clanking of the furnace. Then I stood up. The space was small, cramped with boxes of holiday decorations and old furniture that Douglas and Pamela had discarded. I walked the perimeter, my eyes scanning every inch with the precision of a soldier clearing a room. That was when I saw it. Next to the mattress, there was an overturned wooden crate serving as a nightstand. On it sat a plastic cup of water and a small framed photo. I picked up the photo. It was me, taken 13 years ago on the day I left. I was smiling, wearing my dress uniform. The glass was cracked, but it was wiped clean. It was the only clean thing in this entire hellhole. Beneath the crate, there was a plastic wastebasket. It was overflowing. I crouched down and pulled the bin toward me. My instincts told me there was something here, something that did not belong in the trash. I saw the edge of a blue envelope. I reached in and pulled it out. My breath hitched in my throat. I recognized the stationery. I recognized the stamp. And I recognized the handwriting because it was my own. It was a letter I had sent from a safe zone in Germany 3 months ago. I turned the envelope over. The seal was unbroken. I dug deeper into the bin. My hands, which had dismantled bombs without shaking, were now trembling with rage. I pulled out another envelope, and another, and another. There were dozens of them. Some were recent, the paper still crisp. Others were yellowed with age, wrinkled from humidity. I picked one up, dated 5 years ago. I tore it open. Inside was a cashier check for $15,000 and a 3-page letter telling her about the sunset. I saw over the Mediterranean, telling her how much I missed her apple pie, telling her that I was doing this all for her. I opened the next one. Another check. $15,000. I opened a third. A birthday card with a special transfer slip for $50,000. I sat there on the cold concrete floor, surrounded by a sea of blue envelopes. I did the math in my head. I did not need a calculator. I knew exactly what I had sent. For 13 years, I had wired $15,000 every single month. I sent bonuses for Christmas. I sent emergency funds when Douglas emailed me saying the roof needed repairs or the boiler broke. Over 13 years, the total came to just over $2 million. $2 million. I looked at the checks in my hand. They were void now, expired. But they told a story darker than any war I had ever fought. Douglas and Pamela had intercepted every single piece of mail. They had not just stolen the money. If they had just cashed the checks and let her live in comfort, I might have forgiven them. Money is just paper. But they had done something far worse. They had stolen my voice. They had let my mother believe for 13 years that her son had forgotten her. They let her sit in this basement night after night, thinking I had abandoned her to poverty, while they lived upstairs eating steak and drinking wine bought with the equity of the house I paid for. They kept the letters in the trash, not bothering to shred them, because they were so arrogant, so sure that I would never return. They treated my love for her like garbage, just like they treated her. I picked up a letter dated 2 years ago. I remembered writing this one. I was in a hospital bed in Sudan recovering from shrapnel wounds. I had written, "Mom, I am coming home soon. Just a little longer. Stay strong." She never read it. She never knew I was trying to come back. I looked over at her sleeping form. She looked so small under my jacket. She had spent thousands of nights in this cold, damp, dark room, wondering why her Conrad never wrote, why he never called. But I had called. I called the landline every Sunday. Douglas always answered. He would tell me Mom is sleeping, or Mom is at church, or Mom is having a bad day and does not recognize anyone. He had built a wall of silence between us, brick by brick. I clenched my fist around the stack of letters crumpling the paper. A sound escaped my throat, a low guttural noise that was half sob, half snarl. I stood up. I carefully placed the unopened letters into the cargo pocket of my pants. These were not just letters anymore. They were evidence. They were ammunition. I walked over to the furnace. I looked at the gauges. I looked at the pipes running up to the main floor carrying heat to the people who had enslaved my mother. I took out my phone. I dialed Jared again. The screen illuminated the darkness of the basement. "Report," I said. My voice was dead calm, devoid of any human warmth. Jared answered immediately. "Boss, I am looking at the financials. It is worse than we thought. They did not just steal the allowance. They took out 3 mortgages on the house. They forged your death certificate 7 years ago to bypass the trust fund requirements. Technically, in the eyes of the state of New York, you have been dead since 2018. "Dead," I repeated. "Yes." "And Conrad?" "They stopped paying her health insurance 5 years ago. She has not seen a real doctor in half a decade. That prescription bottle you found?" I ran the serial number. It is not from a pharmacy. It is black market sedative. Cheap stuff used for calming down livestock. The room spun. Livestock. They were drugging her with animal tranquilizers. I looked at my mother one last time. "Jared," I said. "I am here, boss. Is the team ready?" "They are standing by at the perimeter. We have eyes on the house. We can breach in 2 minutes." "No, not yet," I said. "I want them to sleep tonight. I want them to wake up tomorrow thinking they got away with it. I want them to feel safe. Because when I tear their world apart, I want them to know exactly who did it." "Understood. What are your orders for the assets?" "Freeze everything," I said. "I want every credit card, every bank account, every hidden offshore fund frozen by 9 a.m. I want the water cut off. I want the electricity cut off. I want the internet cut off. Consider it done. And Jared? Yeah? Find out where Douglas keeps his car keys. And find out where he keeps his prized collection of vintage watches. On it." "Why?" "Because," I said, looking at the pile of trash that contained my life earnings, "I think it is time for a little redistribution of wealth." I hung up. I sat back down on the cold floor next to my mother. I reached out and took her hand. Her skin was rough like sandpaper, but it was the only thing in the world that felt real. I leaned my head back against the concrete wall and closed my eyes. I did not sleep. I sat there in the dark listening to the furnace, counting the seconds until dawn. They thought I was a broken old man. They thought I was a beggar. Tomorrow they would learn that they had locked a wolf in the basement, and the wolf was very, very hungry. The sun had not yet risen when I woke up on the concrete floor. My back ached, a dull, throbbing reminder of my age and the unforgiving hardness of the basement. I rolled over and checked on my mother. She was still asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. The heavy combat jacket was pulled up to her chin, and in the dim light, she looked like a small, broken bird. I gently tucked a stray lock of silver hair behind her ear. I promised her silently that this would be the last day she slept in a room designed for storing coal. I stood up and stretched, feeling my joints pop. Today was not about brute force. Today was about intelligence gathering. I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went. I walked over to the corner where the main water line entered the house. It was an old copper system, one I had installed myself 30 years ago. I reached into my tool bag and pulled out a heavy pipe wrench. I did not need to fix anything, but I needed a reason to be upstairs. I needed a reason to be in the frantic heart of the enemy territory. I gave the main valve a sharp turn, cutting the water pressure just enough to make the pipes in the walls groan and rattle. It was a sound that would drive a hungover man crazy. 10 minutes later, I was knocking on the door of the master study. "Go away!" Douglas shouted from inside. I knocked again harder. "Sir, it is the plumbing. The pipes are backing up. If I do not check the pressure valve in your office, the whole second floor might flood." There was a string of curses, then the sound of a heavy lock turning. The door swung open. The smell hit me instantly. It was the sour stench of stale cigar smoke, spilled scotch, and fear. Douglas stood there in a silk bathrobe that had seen better days. His eyes were bloodshot, and his skin was pasty. He looked like a man who had not slept in a week. "Make it quick, you old fool," he snarled, stepping aside. "I have a conference call in 5 minutes." I walked into the study. This room used to be my sanctuary. I had lined the walls with mahogany bookshelves and filled them with first editions. I had placed a massive oak desk in the center facing the window that overlooked the ocean. Now the room was a disaster zone. The books were gone, replaced by empty spaces and dust. The desk was buried under piles of overdue notices and legal letters. The curtains were drawn, shutting out the light. I moved toward the radiator in the corner, keeping my head down. My eyes scanned the room, recording everything. An open safe in the corner. Empty. A bottle of Glenfiddich on the desk. Empty. A stack of poker chips from a casino in Atlantic City. While I pretended to tighten a bolt on the radiator, I reached into my pocket. I did not pull out a wrench. I pulled out a device the size of a dime. It was a listening bug, leftover tech from a job in Beirut. It had a battery life of 300 hours and could pick up a whisper from 50 feet away. I slid my hand behind the heavy oak bookshelf and pressed the device against the wood. It stuck instantly. "All done, sir," I said, standing up and wiping my greasy hands on my pants. "Just a loose valve." "Get out," Douglas muttered, rubbing his temples. "And tell the old woman to bring me coffee." Black. I nodded and left, closing the door behind me. I did not go to the kitchen. I went back down to the basement, sitting in the dark next to the furnace. I put a single wireless earbud into my left ear and tapped the app on my phone. The audio feed was crystal clear. I heard the scratch of a match lighting a cigar. I heard the clink of glass. Then I heard the sound of a phone dialing. "Hello? Is this Sal?" Douglas' voice was trembling. He was trying to sound confident, but I could hear the terror in his throat. I listened as the person on the other end spoke. I could not hear the other side, but I did not need to. Douglas' answers told me everything. "Look, Sal, I know I missed the payment last Friday, but I have a solution." No, do not send anyone to the house, please. My wife is here. Listen to me. The house is as good as sold." I clenched my jaw. He was selling the estate. "Yes, I have a buyer lined up, a developer from China. They want to bulldoze it and build condos. They are offering $4 million cash. I know it is worth $6, but I need the money fast. I can have your $80,000 by tomorrow afternoon. Just give me 24 hours. $80,000. My brother was going to sell our family legacy, our history, and my mother's sanctuary for pennies on the dollar just to pay off a gambling debt." There was a pause. Douglas was listening. Then he spoke again, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The old woman? Do not worry about her, she is not a problem. I made a few calls this morning. There is a state facility in New Jersey. Sunshine Meadows. They have a bed opening in the indigent ward. It is cheap. The state pays for it. I just have to drop her off and sign the surrender papers. Sunshine Meadows. I knew that place. It was a warehouse for the forgotten. A place where the elderly were strapped to beds and left to rot in their own filth. A place where the average life expectancy after admission was 6 months. I will take her there tonight, Douglas said. Once she is gone and the house is sold, I will have your money. And Sal? We are square after this, right? He hung up. I heard him exhale a long, shuddering breath. I sat there in the darkness, and I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. This was not just greed. This was murder by bureaucracy. He was planning to discard our mother like a broken appliance to save his own skin. Then I heard the office door open on the audio feed. Dad? It was Justin. I did not hear a knock. Justin just walked in. I told you to knock, Douglas yelled. I am busy handling business. Handling business? Justin laughed. Is that what you call begging your bookie for more time? I heard you, Dad. You are pathetic. Watch your mouth or I will cut off your credit cards, Douglas shouted. You already did, Justin shouted back. My card got declined at the club last night. Do you know how embarrassing that is? I had to borrow money from a bouncer. I need $5,000. Right now. I do not have $5,000, Justin. I have nothing. The walls are closing in on us. Then sell something, Justin screamed. Sell the car. Sell Mom jewelry. I listened closely. My heart rate slowed down. This was the confirmation I needed. There is no jewelry left, Douglas snapped. We sold the diamonds last year. We sold the emeralds at Christmas. The safe is empty. Not everything. Justin's voice turned sly. You forgot about the blue one. The one she keeps pinned to that ugly old coat in the closet. The sapphire brooch. I froze. The sapphire brooch. It was the first gift my father had ever given Beatrice. It was not the most expensive piece she owned, but it was her most treasured. She wore it every Sunday to church. She told me once that looking at it made her feel like she was young and loved again. You took the brooch? Douglas asked, his voice low. I took it this morning, Justin said casually, while she was scrubbing the floor. She did not even notice. She is so senile she probably thinks she lost it. You little thief. Douglas sounded impressed, not angry. How much did you get? I haven't not sold it yet. I am going to the pawn shop on Main Street in an hour. The guy said he would give me $3,000 for the stone. It is a big sapphire. $3,000? Douglas scoffed. That stone is worth 10. Do not go to the pawn shop. Give it to me. I will add it to the payment for Sal. No way, Justin yelled. This is my money. I have debts too, Dad. You are not the only one who likes to play poker. I took the earbud out. I had heard enough. I stood up. My hands were steady, but my blood was boiling. They were cannibals. They were eating their own family alive piece by piece. They had stripped my mother of her dignity, her home, and now they were fighting over the last scrap of sentimental value she had left. The sapphire brooch. I looked at my watch. It was 9 a.m. The pawn shop on Main Street opened at 10. I walked over to my duffel bag. I reached past the tactical gear, past the first aid kit, and pulled out a small black velvet pouch. Inside was a stack of gold coins. Krugerrands. Currency that worked anywhere in the world. Currency that could not be traced and could not be frozen. I needed to go to town, but I could not take the car. I had no keys, and taking a vehicle would alert them. I would walk. It was 3 miles to town. A light jog for a man who used to march 50 miles with 100 pounds on his back. I knelt down beside my mother one last time. She was awake now, staring at the ceiling. Mom, I said softly, I have to go out for a little while. I need you to stay here. Do not go upstairs. Do not talk to Douglas. Just stay on the mattress." She looked at me, her eyes filled with confusion. "Are you leaving me? Like Conrad left?" "No," I promised. "I am coming back. And when I come back, I am going to bring you something pretty." I stood up and buttoned my jacket. I walked out the basement door into the cold morning air. I moved through the hedges, avoiding the security cameras I knew were blind spots because I had created them. I hit the main road and started to run. My boots hit the pavement with a rhythmic thud. Left, right, left, right. With every step, I visualized the face of my nephew, Justin, the boy I had once bounced on my knee, the boy who was now willing to sell his grandmother memories for a few hands of poker. He was going to the pawn shop. Well, he was in for a surprise, because I was going to be there first. And I was not going to buy the brooch with money. I was going to buy it with fear. I pulled my phone out as I ran and dialed Jared. "Jared," I said, wind whipping past the microphone. "Go ahead, boss. I need a team at the pawn shop on Main, and I need you to pull the security footage from the interior of the shop. I want clear 4K video of Justin transaction. I want his face, his voice, and the item clearly visible. Consider it done. Are you going to intercept him?" "No," I said, my voice cold as the winter wind. "I am going to let him sell it. I want the crime committed. I want the theft on record. Grand larceny. Trafficking in stolen goods. I want enough evidence to bury him in a cell for 5 years. That is cold, boss." I thought about my mother wearing taped shoes. I thought about the bruise on her arm. Not cold, Jared. Just fair. I hung up and picked up the pace. The pawn shop was waiting, and so was the beginning of the end for the Steele family. I returned to the estate just as the sun began its descent, casting long, distorted shadows across the manicured lawn. The trip to the pawn shop had been successful. Justin was now a recorded felon on 4 different high-definition cameras, and the sapphire brooch was safely in my pocket, wrapped in a soft cloth. But the war was not over. It was only shifting fronts. I entered through the servants' entrance, moving silently into the pantry. The house was quiet in that heavy, suffocating way that expensive houses often are. Douglas was likely passed out in his study, and Justin was out spending his ill-gotten gains. That left Pamela. I heard the clinking of china in the kitchen. I peered through the crack in the door. Pamela was standing at the island counter. She was humming a tune, something cheerful and light, that stood in stark contrast to what her hands were doing. She had a mortar and pestle. Beside her was a large orange prescription bottle. I watched as she shook 3 large white pills into the stone bowl. 3. For a woman who weighed maybe 90 pounds, soaking wet. 3 pills seemed excessive for anything other than a terminal illness. She began to grind them. The sound of the pestle crushing the medicine against the mortar was rhythmic and grating. She ground them into a fine white dust. Then she reached for a teapot. She brewed a cup of herbal tea, the steam rising in the afternoon light. She dumped the powder into the tea and stirred it vigorously with a silver spoon. "There," she whispered to herself, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips. "That should keep the old bat quiet for the party." She turned to open the refrigerator, grabbing a slice of lemon. In that split second of distraction, I saw my opportunity, but I could not move yet. I had to know what was in that bottle. Pamela placed the tea on a tray and walked out of the kitchen, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She was heading to the basement door. I waited 5 seconds, then slipped into the kitchen. The prescription bottle was still on the counter. She had forgotten to put it back in her haste. I picked it up. The label was peeled off, mostly torn, but I could still read the chemical name printed on the side. Thorazine, chlorpromazine, 200 milligrams. My blood ran cold. I knew this drug. In the field, we used it in extreme cases for psychosis. It was a heavy-duty antipsychotic, a chemical restraint. It turned violent men into statues, For an 89-year-old woman with a frail heart, 3 pills at this dosage was not medicine. It was a chemical lobotomy. It explained the drooling. It explained the confusion. It explained why she did not recognize her own son. They were not treating her dementia. They were manufacturing it. They were keeping her in a medically induced fog to make her compliant, to stop her from asking questions about her bank accounts, and to make it easier to declare her incompetent. It was the most cowardly form of torture I had ever witnessed. I had seen warlords treat their prisoners with more dignity than this. I looked at the bottle in my hand. Then I looked at the cabinet above the sink. I remembered seeing a bottle of multivitamins there earlier when I was looking for water. Specifically, vitamin B12. I opened the cabinet. There it was. Large white pills almost identical in size and shape to the poison Pamela was feeding her. I worked fast. My hands moved with the precision of a bomb disposal technician. I dumped the remaining Thorazine pills into a napkin and shoved them into my pocket. Then I filled the orange prescription bottle with the vitamins. I put the cap back on and placed it exactly where Pamela had left it. I slipped out the back door just as I heard Pamela's footsteps returning. I ran around the side of the house to the exterior basement entrance. I needed to be there when she drank it. I needed to see if the damage was permanent. When I entered the basement, Pamela was already there, standing over the mattress like a prison warden. My mother was sitting up, looking terrified. "Drink it, Beatrice," Pamela said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "It is your special tea. It helps you sleep. You know how cranky you get when you do not sleep." "I do not want it," my mother whispered. "It makes my head fuzzy. It makes my tongue feel thick." "Do not be a child," Pamela snapped, losing the facade. "Drink it, or I will have Douglas come down here." "Do you want Douglas to come down here?" My mother flinched. The threat was enough. She took the cup with trembling hands. I stood in the shadows by the furnace watching. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to rush forward, to knock the cup from her hand, to snap Pamela's neck. But I held back. I knew the tea she was holding now was harmless. It was just hot water, lemon, and vitamins. My mother took a sip, then another. She drained the cup. "Good girl," Pamela said, patting her on the head as if she were a dog. "Now go to sleep. We have a big night tomorrow, and I do not want you making a scene." Pamela grabbed the empty cup and marched up the stairs, locking the door behind her. I waited in the silence. The furnace hummed. I walked over and sat on the edge of the mattress. My mother looked at me. Her eyes were still dull, clouded by years of this chemical abuse. "Did you finish the gardening, sir?" she asked. "Yes, Mom," I said softly. "The gardening is done." She lay back down, closing her eyes, expecting the usual wave of darkness to pull her under. She expected the heavy sedation that made her limbs feel like lead. I sat there and watched her for an hour, then 2. Usually by now she would be comatose, drooling, unable to wake up even if you shouted. But today was different. At the 3-hour mark, she opened her eyes. They were clear. She sat up slowly. She looked at her hands. She flexed her fingers. She looked around the basement, not with the vague confusion of a patient, but with the sharp realization of a prisoner. "Why am I down here?" she asked. Her voice was stronger. It was not the whisper of a broken woman. It was the voice of the mother I remembered. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "Mom? Can you hear me?" She turned her head and looked at me. Really looked at me. She narrowed her eyes, studying the scar on my cheek, studying the way I sat. "You look like him," she said. "You look just like my Conrad. But Conrad is gone. Douglas told me he died in the desert. Douglas showed me the paper. Douglas lied," I said, taking her hand. It was warm now, not cold and clammy like before. Douglas lied about everything. She looked at the picture on the crate. Then she looked back at me. A spark of recognition flickered in her gaze. It was like watching a lighthouse beam cut through the fog. "Conrad?" she whispered. "Yes, Mom. I am here." She reached out and touched my face. Her fingers traced the line of my jaw. Her hand was shaking, but this time it was from emotion, not from drugs. "You got old," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "You have gray in your beard." I laughed, a choked, wet sound. "Yeah. I got old trying to get back to you." She looked down at her clothes, the dirty maid uniform. She looked at the concrete floor. She looked at the furnace. The realization of her reality hit her, and I watched the horror wash over her face. "They put me in the cellar," she said, her voice rising in anger. "In my own house. They put me in the cellar and told me I was sick." "You are not sick, Mom." I squeezed her hand. "They were poisoning you. But that stops today." She gripped my hand with surprising strength. The vitamins were kicking in, giving her body the energy it had been starved of. The absence of the sedative was lifting the veil from her mind. "Where is your father?" she asked, suddenly looking around. "Mom, Dad died 15 years ago, remember?" She closed her eyes for a moment, processing the pain. Yes. Yes, I remember now. The heart attack. In the garden." She opened her eyes again, and they were fierce. Steel gray, just like mine. "Douglas." She spat the name out. "He did this. And that woman. That awful woman he married." I nodded. "Yes." "Why?" she asked. "Why would they do this? I gave them everything. I let them live here. I gave them money." "Because they are weak," I said. "And weak people destroy strong people to feel powerful. But they made a mistake, Mom. They forgot that you are a steel, and steels do not break." She sat up straighter, pushing the blanket aside. "Get me out of here, Conrad. Take me upstairs. I want to sleep in my own bed." I gently pushed her back down. "Not yet, Mom. Not yet. We have to be patient. Tonight you have to stay here. We have to let them think they have won, just for one more night." "Why?" she demanded. "Because tomorrow night they are throwing a party. They are going to try to sell the house. And when they do, I want you to be the one to stop them. But I need you strong. I need you clear-headed." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the sapphire brooch. I unwrapped the cloth. The blue stone caught the dim light of the single bulb. It sparkled with a deep, intense fire. My mother gasped. "My brooch." "Justin said I lost it. He said I threw it away." "He lied," I said, placing it in her hand. "I got it back." She clutched it to her chest, tears spilling from her eyes. But these were not tears of despair. They were tears of relief. "Listen to me, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a command tone. "Tomorrow I am going to give you more of the special tea. But it is just vitamins. You have to pretend. You have to act like you are still sick. You have to act confused. Can you do that?" She wiped her eyes and looked at me. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by a steely resolve that I recognized from my own reflection. "I raised 2 boys on my own while your father was at sea," she said. "I can handle a few hours of acting." "Good." I pulled a protein bar from my pocket and handed it to her. "Eat this. You need strength. The soup they give you is just water." She ate it quickly, hungrily. I watched her, realizing that for the first time in years, she was actually nourishing her body. "Conrad," she said after she finished. "Yeah, Mom? Make them pay." I looked at her. In that moment, she was not a frail old woman. She was the matriarch of a dynasty that had been usurped. She was a queen in exile demanding her throne back. I smiled, a cold, dark smile. I will, Mom. I am going to take everything from them. I am going to leave them with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the regret in their hearts. She lay back down, pulling the blanket up. But this time she did not curl into a ball of defeat. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, plotting. I checked the time. It was almost midnight. Upstairs, the house was silent. But down here in the dark, the resistance had begun. The fog was gone, and the storm was coming. I went back to my corner and sat down. I checked my phone. Jared had sent a message. Accounts frozen. Legal team on standby. The trap is set. I looked at my mother one last time before closing my eyes. She was clutching the sapphire brooch in her sleep like a talisman. "Sleep well, Mom," I whispered. "Tomorrow we go hunting." The morning of the party arrived with a sky the color of bruised iron. The air in the Hamptons was usually crisp and smelling of sea salt, but today inside the estate it felt heavy and suffocating. I woke up before dawn. My mother was still sleeping, clutching the sapphire brooch I had returned to her. She looked peaceful for the first time in years. Her breathing was deep and rhythmic, no longer jagged with the chemical interference of the drugs I had flushed away. I pulled the blanket up to her chin and silently promised her that by the time the moon rose tonight, the kingdom would be hers again. I went upstairs to the kitchen. My role today was simple. I was the invisible man, the senile uncle, the charity case who was allowed to sweep the floors and take out the trash. It was a disguise I had perfected over years of undercover work. People never look at the help. They look through them. And that was their fatal mistake. The house was already in chaos. Pamela was screaming into her phone, pacing back and forth across the marble floor in her silk robe. She was trying to coordinate the caterers, the florists, and the musicians for tonight. She wanted everything perfect to impress the Chinese developers coming to buy the house. She wanted to sell the illusion of a happy, prosperous family living in a pristine estate. I made myself a cup of instant coffee and leaned against the counter, watching her unravel. "Do not tell me you are out of lobster tails," she shrieked into the phone. "I ordered them 2 weeks ago. Do you know who I am? I will ruin your business." She threw the phone onto the island and massaged her temples. She looked at me standing there in my worn work clothes and sneered. "What are you staring at, old man? Go outside and sweep the driveway. If there is a single leaf on the pavement when the guests arrive, I will make you eat it." I nodded slowly, giving her a vacant smile. "Yes, ma'am. No leaves. I understand." I shuffled out the back door, grabbing a broom. But I did not just sweep. I had prepared the battlefield while they slept. The first domino was about to fall. At 8:30, Douglas came out of the house. He was dressed in his tennis whites, holding a racket, trying to look like the lord of the manor. He was heading to the club to schmooze with some potential investors. He walked with a swagger that was entirely unearned, a man convincing himself he was still in control. He approached his Porsche Panamera parked in the circular driveway. He hit the unlock button on his key fob. The lights flashed. He got in, tossed his racket onto the passenger seat, and pushed the start button. Click. Nothing. The engine did not roar to life. It did not even cough. I watched from behind a hydrangea bush, sweeping the same spot of pavement over and over. Douglas pushed the button again, harder this time, as if force could persuade the mechanics. Click, click, click. "Come on!" he yelled, slamming his hands on the leather steering wheel. "Do not do this to me! Not today!" He jumped out of the car and popped the hood. He stared at the engine block with the confused expression of a man who has never turned a wrench in his life. He wiggled a few wires. He kicked the tire. I slowly made my way over, dragging the broom behind me. Car trouble, sir? I asked, my voice raspy and helpful. Douglas spun around, his face red with rage. No, Conrad, I just enjoy standing here looking at an engine block. Yes, car trouble. It will not start. Maybe it is the battery, I suggested innocently. My old truck used to do that when it got cold. It is a brand new Porsche, you idiot. It does not have a dead battery, Douglas shouted. He pulled out his phone and dialed the dealership. I listened as he screamed at the service manager. He demanded a tow truck. He demanded a loaner. But then his voice dropped. What do you mean you cannot send anyone until Monday? I am a VIP client. This is an emergency. I suppressed a smile. I knew the dealership would not come. Jared had hacked into their scheduling system at 4 a.m. and flagged Douglas' account as do not service, non-payment. Douglas hung up and threw his phone onto the grass. He looked at the car like he wanted to set it on fire. Damn it! He kicked the bumper. I have a meeting in 20 minutes. I walked closer, peering into the engine bay. I knew exactly why it would not start. I had removed the starter relay fuse and loosened the ground wire just enough to break the circuit. It was a 5-second fix, but to a man like Douglas, it was a catastrophic failure. Do you want me to take a look? I asked. I used to fix Jeeps in the Army. Douglas laughed, a harsh barking sound. You? You cannot even fix a sandwich, Conrad. Get away from my car before you break it more. Go clean the pool. I shrugged, just trying to help. I walked away, leaving him stranded. He had to call an Uber. The image of Douglas Steele waiting on the curb of his $5 million estate for a Toyota Camry to pick him up was a small victory, but it tasted sweet. By noon, the tension in the house was palpable. The car was dead. The caterers were late. And now it was time for Phase 2. Justin was in the media room. I could hear the explosions and gunfire of his video game echoing through the hallway. He was shouting into his headset, cursing at other players, his voice cracking with entitlement. I walked down the hall to the utility closet. This was the nerve center of the house, the breaker box for the entire electrical system. I opened the panel. I did not cut the power completely. That would be too obvious. Instead, I located the breaker for the media room and the second-floor Wi-Fi router. I flipped the switch. Down the hall, the gunfire stopped instantly. There was a moment of silence. Then a scream of pure adolescent rage. No, 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 I was on a kill streak. I heard footsteps thumping down the hall. Justin burst out of the room holding his controller like a weapon. Mom! The internet died. The power is out. Pamela came running from the dining room. What? The whole house? No, just my room, Justin whined. Fix it! I stepped out of the utility closet, closing the door softly behind me. I held a feather duster in my hand, looking confused. Is something wrong? I asked. The lights flickered in the kitchen, too. Pamela glared at me. Did you touch anything? Did you touch the breakers? Me? I shook my head, eyes wide. I do not touch electricity, ma'am. I am afraid of shocks. I was just dusting the baseboards. She pushed past me and opened the panel. All the switches looked normal. I had tripped the internal mechanism without moving the external toggle, a trick an engineer taught me in Berlin. To the untrained eye, everything looked fine. It looks on, Pamela said, flipping it back and forth. Why is it not working? Justin was pacing, hyperventilating. I bet he did it. He pointed a shaking finger at me. The old creep probably cut the wire. Pamela looked at me with suspicion. But then she looked at my hands. They were trembling slightly, a performance I maintained constantly. He does not know a circuit breaker from a toaster, Justin. It is probably just the grid. The wiring in this house is old. Old! Justin screamed. Grandma spent a fortune rewiring this place 10 years ago. It is piece of crap. Everything is breaking. I stood there letting their anger bounce off me. They were turning on each other. The stress was finding the cracks in their relationship and prying them open. Pamela called an electrician, but of course the number she dialed routed directly to Jared's burner phone. Jared, playing the role of a busy dispatcher, told her the earliest appointment was next Tuesday. So now they had no luxury car, no internet, and a media room that was dead silent. But the biggest blow was yet to come. At 2 o'clock, the liquor delivery arrived. A truck from the finest wine merchant in the city pulled up. They began unloading crates of Dom Perignon and cases of aged scotch. This was the fuel for tonight's party, the liquid courage Douglas needed to sell the house. I was trimming the hedges near the front door, watching. Douglas had returned in his Uber, looking disheveled and furious. He stood by the door, signing the invoice. "Just put it on the house account," he said, waving his hand dismissively. The delivery driver, a burly man with a tablet, frowned. "I am sorry, Mr. Steele. The system is declining the charge." "What?" Douglas snapped. "Try it again. It is an unlimited black card." The driver tapped the screen. "Declined, sir. Code 05. Do not honor. It says to contact your bank." Douglas' face went pale. "That is impossible. There must be a mistake. Here, try this one." He pulled out another card. "Platinum. Declined." He pulled out a third. "Gold. Declined." I snipped a branch of the hedge. Snip, snip. The sound was sharp and final. Douglas was sweating now. I could see the moisture beading on his forehead. The driver was getting impatient. "Sir, if you cannot pay, I have to take the product back." "No," Douglas shouted. "You cannot take it back. I have guests coming in 4 hours. I need this wine. Then I need a valid form of payment." Douglas looked around frantically. He looked at Pamela, who was standing in the doorway, her hand over her mouth. "Give him your card, Pam," Douglas hissed. I cannot," Pamela whispered. "Mine was declined at the florist an hour ago. I thought it was a glitch." Silence descended on the driveway. The only sound was the wind rustling the leaves and the rhythmic snip-snip of my shears. They were frozen, financially paralyzed. Jared had executed the order perfectly. Every asset, every credit line, every secret slush fund was locked down tight. Douglas turned to the driver, his voice trembling with desperation. "Look, I have cash inside. Shh, just wait here." He ran into the house. I knew where he was going. He was going to the wall safe in his study, the safe where he kept his emergency cash stack. I kept trimming the hedges. I counted to 60. I heard a roar of rage from inside the house. It was the sound of a wounded animal. He had found the safe empty. I had not taken the money. I had simply moved it. I had taken the $50,000 in cash and hidden it in the one place they would never look. Inside the hollow base of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Douglas came stumbling out of the house. He looked wild. His hair was messed up, his tie undone. "The money is gone," he whispered. "Someone took the money." He looked at the driver. Then he looked at Pamela. And finally, his eyes landed on me. For a second, I saw a flicker of genuine danger in his eyes. He marched over to me, grabbing me by the collar of my work shirt. "You," he spat. "Did you take it? Did you go in my study?" I dropped the shears. I raised my hands in a gesture of surrender. My body went limp, playing the part of the terrified old man. "Take what, sir?" I stammered. "I have been here trimming the bushes all afternoon. Ask the driver." He saw me. The driver nodded. "He has been here since I pulled up, buddy. Leave the old guy alone." Douglas shoved me away. I stumbled back, pretending to lose my balance. "It is Sal," Douglas muttered. He was talking to himself now, pacing in circles. "Sal knows I cannot pay. He hacked my accounts. He sent someone to empty the safe. He is sending a message." He looked at the delivery truck. "Just take it. Take it all back." Douglas turned and walked back into the house, defeated. Pamela followed him, sobbing quietly about how the party was ruined. The driver loaded the champagne back onto the truck. He looked at me and shook his head. "Rich people, man. They are all crazy." I picked up my shears. "Yeah," I said, my voice dropping an octave now that no one was listening. "Crazy." I watched the truck drive away. No vintage champagne for tonight. They would have to serve the cheap stuff from the cellar. The illusion of wealth was crumbling. I went back to the basement. My mother was sitting up waiting for me. She looked at me with questions in her eyes. "Did you hear the shouting?" she asked. I did. I sat down beside her. "They are having a bad day, Mom. The car is broken. The internet is out. And they just lost all their fancy wine." She smiled, a genuine mischievous smile. "Good." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a protein bar. "Lunch," I said. "Conrad," she said, peeling the wrapper. "Is it almost time?" "Soon," I said. "Tonight the guests arrive. Tonight they try to sell your home. And tonight we walk up those stairs and we take it back." I could feel the energy in the house shifting above us. Fear was setting in. Paranoia was rotting them from the inside out. They were looking at shadows, wondering who was targeting them. They blamed the bookie. They blamed the bank. They blamed bad luck. They never once suspected the man with the gray beard sleeping in their basement. And that is exactly how I wanted it. I checked my watch. 4 hours until the party. 4 hours until the final act. "Rest up, Mom," I said. "You have a big performance tonight." She nodded, gripping the sapphire brooch. "I am ready." I leaned back against the concrete wall and closed my eyes, listening to the sound of footsteps pacing frantically on the floorboards above my head. The rats were trapped. Now it was time to close the cage. The sun began to dip below the tree line, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and bleeding orange. I was on my knees in the flower bed near the kitchen terrace, pretending to weed a patch of petunias that were already perfectly manicured. My hands were covered in soil dirt wedged deep under my fingernails. It was a grounding sensation. The earth was real. The cold wind was real. The calculated cruelty happening inside the house was the only thing that felt like a nightmare. I kept my head down, listening to the rhythm of the house. The silence from the media room was still holding. Justin had likely stormed off to a friend's house or was sulking in his room, unable to scream into his void without the internet. Douglas was holed up in his study, probably drinking the cheap whiskey he kept hidden in the bottom drawer now that his vintage collection was gone. Then the back door creaked open. I did not look up immediately. I hunched my shoulders, adopting the posture of the broken old man. I waited for a shout or a command or a criticism about my work ethic. But there was no shouting. Instead, there was a soft shuffling sound, leather scraping against stone. I turned my head slowly. It was my mother. She had slipped out of the kitchen door. She was still wearing that degrading maid uniform, but something about her had changed. For the last 13 years, whenever I pictured her or saw her in the shadows of this house, she stood with a curvature to her spine, as if the weight of the world was crushing her. She walked with her head down, eyes fixed on the floor, afraid to meet anyone's gaze. Today she was standing straighter, not fully upright, but the curve was less pronounced. Her head was lifted. She was scanning the yard, her eyes moving with purpose. She spotted me. She looked over her shoulder, checking the kitchen window, to make sure no one was watching. Then she moved toward me. She moved quickly. There was an agility in her step that had been absent yesterday. The vitamins were working. The absence of the chemical straitjacket Pamela had kept her in was allowing her nervous system to fire again. She reached me and knelt down in the dirt beside me. She did not care about the grass stains on her apron. "Sir," she whispered. I looked at her. Her eyes were the color of the Atlantic Ocean after a storm gray but clearing. The milky haze of the thorazine was dissipating. I could see the pupils reacting to the light. I could see the intelligence that had raised me returning to the surface. "Mom," I wanted to say. "It is me." But I stayed in character. I wiped my dirty hands on my pants and looked at her with wide, fearful eyes. "Yes, ma'am? Do you need something cleaned?" She shook her head. She reached into the deep pocket of her apron. Her hand came out holding something wrapped in a napkin. She pressed it into my hand. Her fingers were warm. "Take this." She said, her voice low and urgent. "You have been working out here all day. I have not seen anyone bring you food." I unwrapped the napkin. Inside was a heel of bread. It was stale, hard as a rock, the kind of piece usually thrown out or used for croutons. And there was a small wedge of cheddar cheese, the cheap kind with the plastic edges still on it. It was scraps. It was garbage to the people inside that house. But to her, it was a lifeline she was extending to a stranger. "Eat it quickly," she warned, glancing at the window again. "Before they see you." I looked at the dry bread in my dirt-stained hand. My throat tightened. I had eaten MREs in the desert. I had eaten snakes in the jungle during survival training. I had dined in the finest steakhouses in Europe. But nothing I had ever tasted carried the weight of this piece of stale bread. Even now, even after they had stripped her of her dignity, her home, and her mind, her first instinct was to feed someone else. Her first instinct was to care for the worker in the yard. "Thank you, ma'am," I said, my voice cracking for real this time. "You do not have to do this. I do," she said. Her eyes locked onto mine. "Listen to me. You seem like a good man. You have kind eyes. You should not be here." I took a bite of the bread. It was dry and tasteless, but I chewed it like it was a sacrament. "Why not, ma'am?" "Because this house is not a home." She whispered the words, trembling with a sudden intensity. "The people who live here, the owners, they are not good people. They have ice in their hearts. The owners." She no longer called them her son or her family. The fog had lifted enough for her to see the bars of her cage. "They treat you bad?" I asked, risking the question. She looked down at her hands, rubbing the spot on her wrist where the bruise was beginning to yellow. "They keep me in the dark," she said softly. "They tell me I am crazy. They tell me I forget things. And for a long time I believed them. I thought my mind was broken. I thought I was useless." She looked up at me again, and a fierce light ignited in her eyes. "But today I remember things. I remember the layout of the garden. I remember that I planted these petunias myself 20 years ago. I remember that I hate the smell of lavender detergent." She leaned closer. "And I remember that I do not belong in the basement." I stopped chewing. I reached out and covered her hand with mine. It was a breach of protocol. The gardener should not touch the help. But I could not stop myself. "You are right," I said, my voice dropping to that steel tone I used when briefing my team. "You do not belong there, and you are not crazy." She stared at my hand covering hers. She stared at the scar on my thumb, a jagged line from a knife fight in Kabul. "I know you," she whispered. It was not a question. It was a dawn of realization. I squeezed her hand. Just then the kitchen door slammed open. "Beatrice!" The shriek cut through the air like a siren. We both flinched. Pamela stood in the doorway. She was dressed for the party in a silver gown that looked like it cost more than the average American made in a year. Her hair was pulled back tight, and her face was a mask of cosmetic fury. "What are you doing down there?" Pamela screamed. "Get away from that filth! You are ruining your uniform." My mother pulled her hand away from mine, but she did not cower. Not immediately. She stood up slowly, using her knees for leverage, not asking for help. "I was just checking the flowers, Pamela," my mother said. Her voice was steady, louder than it had been in years. Pamela froze. She heard it too. The clarity, the lack of slur, the defiance. She marched down the stone steps, her heels clicking aggressively. She stopped inches from my mother's face. "Checking the flowers?" she hissed. "Since when do you check flowers? You are supposed to be peeling potatoes for the canapes." "I finished the potatoes," my mother replied, looking Pamela dead in the eye. "And I polished the silver, and I folded the napkins." Pamela stepped back as if she had been slapped. She looked at my mother's pupils. She looked at her posture. "You seem spry today," Pamela said, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Very awake." "I slept well," my mother said. "Did you?" Pamela's voice turned dangerous. She circled my mother like a shark. "Or maybe you forgot to take your medicine again." I kept my head down, pulling weeds aggressively, but my muscles were coiled tight, ready to spring. "I took the tea you gave me." My mother lied. It was a beautiful lie. Smooth, convincing. Pamela stopped circling. She grabbed my mother's chin, forcing her to look up. She examined her eyes closely. "Too awake," Pamela muttered to herself. "This is not good. Not for tonight. The developers are coming. I cannot have you rambling about the past. I cannot have you lucid enough to beg for help." She released my mother's chin with a shove. "Go inside," Pamela ordered. "Go to your room in the basement. Do not come out until I call you." My mother hesitated. She looked at me one last time. A silent message passed between us. "Wait." She turned and walked back into the house. Pamela stayed on the terrace. She pulled a pack of slim cigarettes from her purse and lit one, her hands shaking slightly. She paced back and forth, muttering. "She is fighting the dose. Tolerance. She must have built up a tolerance. Damn it." She took a long drag and exhaled a cloud of smoke. "If she makes a scene tonight, Douglas will kill me. If she starts telling the investors that she owns the house, the deal is dead." She pulled out her phone. She did not call a doctor. She opened the Notes app, presumably checking her inventory. "I need to up the dosage," she said aloud. I heard her clearly from 3 feet away. "Double it. No, triple it. Just to be safe. I need her out. I need her to be a prop. A silent, smiling prop in the corner. Or better yet, asleep in the chair." She looked at her watch. "Cocktails at 6. I will give it to her at 5. A double crush in her tomato juice. That should knock a horse out." She smiled a cruel, satisfied smile. "Sleep tight, Beatrice." Pamela flicked her cigarette butt into the petunias I had just weeded and turned to go back inside. I waited until the door clicked shut. I picked up the cigarette butt. I crushed it in my palm until the embers burned my skin. The pain focused me. Triple the dose. If that bottle still contained Thorazine, a triple dose would not just put my mother to sleep. It would likely stop her heart. It would drop her blood pressure so low she would slip into a coma and never wake up. Pamela was not just planning to sedate her. Whether she realized it or not, she was planning a negligent homicide. She was willing to risk killing the woman who gave her husband life just to ensure a real estate transaction went smoothly. But the bottle did not contain thorazine. It contained vitamin B12. A triple dose of vitamin B12 would not kill her. It would do the exact opposite. It would flood her system with energy. It would sharpen her cognitive function. It would make her alert, vibrant, and impossible to ignore. Pamela thought she was loading a tranquilizer dart. In reality, she was loading a stimulant. She was about to give my mother the supercharge she needed to stand up and fight. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my knees. I looked at the setting sun. The timing was perfect. At 5 o'clock, Pamela would administer the poison. By 6 o'clock, when the guests arrived, my mother would be buzzing with energy. By 7 o'clock, when Douglas tried to sign the papers, she would be the sharpest person in the room. I reached into my pocket and touched the cold metal of the sapphire brooch. I pulled out my phone and sent a message to Jared. The target is preparing a chemical attack. It will backfire. Are the assets in place? Jared replied instantly. Legal team is parked down the street. Police are on standby for the signal. The drone is overhead recording everything. I walked toward the shed to put away my tools. I was done being the gardener. The sun was down. The shadows were long. It was time to get dressed. I had a black duffel bag hidden under a tarp in the shed. I unzipped it. Inside was not my dirty work clothes. Inside was a tuxedo, a bespoke suit I had tailored in London, and next to it my shoulder holster and a clean Sig Sauer P226. I stripped off the gardener disguise. I washed the dirt from my face and hands in the utility sink. I put on the white shirt, the silk tie, the jacket that fit like armor. I checked my reflection in the dusty mirror of the shed. The old man was gone. Conrad Steele, the ghost, the commander, the sun was looking back. I strapped the holster on. I checked the chamber of the pistol. Tonight I would not be serving drinks. Tonight I would be serving a warrant. I waited in the shed, watching the lights of the house flicker on one by one. I saw the first limousine pull up to the gate. I saw Douglas greeting guests with a fake smile, trying to hide the fact that he was bankrupt and desperate. I saw Pamela running around looking manic, and I imagined my mother downstairs in the dark, drinking her poison, feeling. The surge of life returned to her veins, preparing to walk up those stairs and reclaim her world. The stage was set. The players were in position. Let the show begin. The house was transforming. It was like watching a cheap carnival set up its tents. The lights were dimmed to hide the dust and the peeling paint in the corners that Douglas had not bothered to fix. Classical music pumped through the speakers, masking the silence of a home that had no soul. I stood in the shadow of the grand staircase, holding a silver tray that felt light in my hands but heavy in my heart. I was part of the furniture now. The old man. The help. I watched Pamela drag my mother out of the downstairs bathroom. I felt a surge of bile rise in my throat. They had not just put her in a uniform. They had put her in a costume. It was a short black dress with a frilly white apron, the kind of thing you buy at a costume shop for Halloween. It was degrading. It was designed to mock her age, to turn the matriarch of the Steele family into a caricature. Pamela had painted my mother's face with garish makeup, bright red lipstick that bled into the wrinkles around her mouth, and heavy blue eyeshadow that made her look like a bruised doll. "Stand up straight," Pamela hissed, jabbing a bobby pin into my mother's silver hair. "You look like a hunchback. Mr. Zhang is bringing his wife. I want you to offer them the crab puffs the second they walk in. Do not speak. Just smile and hold the tray." My mother stood there, swaying slightly. She was playing her part perfectly. To Pamela, she looked drugged, sedated on the verge of collapse. But I saw the tension in her calves. I saw the way her fingers curled into a fist at her side before relaxing. She was not falling asleep. She was coiling. Douglas came storming out of his study. He smelled of strong mints and panic. He was adjusting his tie, his hands shaking so badly he could barely get the knot right. "Is she ready?" he barked, not looking at his mother, but at his wife. "She is fine," Pamela said, stepping back to admire her work. "I gave her the cocktail. She will be docile as a lamb. Just do not let her wander off." Douglas walked over to my mother. He grabbed her chin roughly, turning her face side to side. "God, she looks terrible," he muttered. "Can you not put more concealer on those bags under her eyes? She looks like a corpse." "She is 89, Douglas," Pamela snapped. "I am not a miracle worker. Just keep the lights low." Douglas released her. He wiped his hand on his jacket as if he had touched something contagious. "Fine." He turned to me. "You, old man, what is your name again?" I kept my head down. "Conrad, sir." "Right. Conrad, stay in the kitchen. Wash the glasses. If I see you in the main hall while the investors are here, I will have security throw you through the window. We are selling a lifestyle here, and you do not fit the aesthetic." I nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." He turned back to the mirror in the hallway, checking his teeth. I watched him. I watched the vanity, the arrogance, the absolute hollowness of his soul. I took a step forward. It was not in the plan. Jared would have screamed in my ear if I had an earpiece in. But I had to say it. I had to give him one last chance. One final opportunity to prove he had a shred of humanity left. "Sir," I said, my voice low and raspy. Douglas spun around, annoyed. "What?" "She is your mother," I said, pointing a trembling finger at Beatrice. "She is not a prop. She is tired. Maybe you should let her rest in her room while you have your party." The silence that followed was absolute. Pamela gasped. Douglas stared at me like the vacuum cleaner had just spoken to him. "Excuse me?" Douglas laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Did you just give me advice on how to handle my assets?" "She is a person, sir, not an asset." Douglas walked over to me. He moved into my personal space close enough that I could see the broken capillaries in his eyes. "Let me explain something to you," he whispered. "Because you seem to be confused about your station in life. That woman standing there is not a person. She is an expense. She is a drain. She is a leaky faucet that has been dripping away my inheritance for 20 years. He poked me hard in the chest. "And tonight, that faucet gets turned off. Tonight I sell this house. Tonight I sign the papers that put her in a state facility where she belongs. And with the money I get, I am going to buy a life that does not involve changing diapers or smelling old people." He smiled, and it was the ugliest thing I had ever seen. "So do not talk to me about what is right. I am doing her a favor. Sunshine Meadows has great coloring books. She will love it." I looked at him. I looked at the brother I had once taught to ride a bike. I looked at the man who used to cry when he scraped his knee, waiting for me to pick him up. That boy was dead. "You will regret this, Douglas," I said. My voice lost the raspy tremor. It dropped an octave, hitting the cold baritone of the man I really was. Douglas blinked. He heard the shift. For a second, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. But then his arrogance roared back. He looked down at my work boots, the cheap, muddy boots I wore as part of my disguise. He gathered saliva in his mouth, and he spit. A glob of spit hit the toe of my boot. "You are nothing," Douglas said. "You are a drifter, a nobody. You are lucky I let you eat my scraps." He stepped back, adjusting his cuffs. "Enjoy the party, Conrad. Wash the dishes. Because the second the ink is dry on that contract, you and the old lady are both out on the street. I am clearing out all the trash tonight." He turned his back on me. Pamela laughed nervously. "Come on, darling. Mr. Zhang just texted. They are at the gate." They walked away toward the front door, putting on their masks of hospitality. Douglas smoothed his hair, and Pamela fixed her smile. I stood there alone in the hallway. I looked down at the spit on my boot. I did not wipe it off. I looked over at my mother. She had watched the whole thing. She was still standing where they left her, holding the empty silver tray. Her face was impassive, but her eyes were burning. She looked at the spit on my shoe. Then she looked up at me. She gave a nearly imperceptible nod. It was permission. It was a command. I turned and walked toward the kitchen. I did not stop at the sink. I walked straight through the pantry, out the back door, and into the cool night air. I went to the shed. I unzipped the black duffel bag. I stripped off the work shirt that smelled of sweat and dirt. I stripped off the pants that Douglas had looked at with such disdain. I put on the white dress shirt. It was crisp clean and tailored to perfection. I put on the black trousers. I tied the silk bow tie. I slipped into the dinner jacket. Finally, I picked up my own shoes, black leather polished to a mirror shine. I put them on, leaving the spit-stained work boots in the corner. I strapped on the shoulder holster. The weight of the Sig Sauer 226 was familiar, comforting. It was the weight of consequence. I checked my reflection one last time. The gardener was gone. Conrad Steele was back. I tapped my earpiece. "Jared, go for it, boss. Cut the power to the gate. Lock it down. Once the guests are inside, nobody leaves. Copy that. The trap is armed." I walked out of the shed. The wind caught the tails of my jacket. I walked across the lawn, not sneaking through the shadows this time, but walking straight down the center of the path. I could hear the music drifting from the house. I could hear the murmur of voices. The party had started. Douglas was inside, pouring drinks, telling lies, trying to sell a legacy he did not own. He thought he was the king of the castle. He had no idea that the executioner was walking up the driveway. I reached the front door. I did not knock. I pushed the doors open with both hands. The heavy wood swung inward, crashing against the stops with a sound like a thunderclap. The music stopped. The conversation died. 50 heads turned to look at me. Douglas was standing on the grand staircase, raising a glass of champagne. He froze. His mouth fell open. He looked at the tuxedo. He looked at the way I stood. He looked at the face he thought he knew but had never really seen. I stepped into the light. "Good evening," I said. My voice filled the room, echoing off the marble walls. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding about the ownership of this property." And then I saw my mother. She stepped out from the shadows behind Douglas. She ripped off the ridiculous frilly apron and threw it over the banister. It fluttered down, landing on Pamela's head. My mother stood tall. She locked eyes with Douglas. "The show is over, son," she said clearly. And I smiled. It was time for justice. The grand ballroom was suffocating. Even with the double doors thrown open, the air was thick with the smell of desperation, masked by expensive cologne and stale champagne. I stood at the top of the short staircase leading down into the sunken living area where Douglas had gathered his potential buyers. The room was packed with people who smelled blood in the water. They knew Douglas was distressed. They knew the property was leveraged, and they were circling like sharks, waiting to tear the meat from the bone. My mother was in the center of the room. She looked small, surrounded by these titans of industry, but she held her head high. She was holding a tray of crystal flutes, but her hands were steady. The vitamins had done their work. Her eyes were sharp, darting from face to face, cataloging the threats. Douglas was sweating profusely. He was trying to charm a heavy-set man in a gray suit, Mr. Henderson, a notorious real estate speculator known for buying distressed assets and stripping them for parts. "Please, Mr. Henderson," Douglas said, his voice cracking slightly. "The asking price is firm at $6 million. You are buying history here. You are buying a legacy." Henderson laughed, a wet, guttural sound. "I am buying a zip code, Douglas. The house is a teardown. The foundation is probably cracked. And frankly, the staff looks like they belong in a museum. He gestured with his drink toward my mother. Hey, you. Sweetheart, Henderson called out. Bring that tray over here. My glass is empty. My mother hesitated. She looked at Douglas. Do as he says. Douglas hissed through his teeth. She walked over. She moved with a dignity that seemed to irritate Henderson. He did not want service, he wanted submission. As she reached out to offer him a fresh glass, he did not take the stem. Instead, his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. He pulled her closer, spilling champagne onto his sleeve. You have got pretty eyes for an old girl, Henderson slurred. Why do you not give us a smile? You look like you are at a funeral. Let go of me, sir, my mother said. Her voice was clear. It cut through the murmur of the party. Henderson blinked, surprised by the resistance. He tightened his grip. The bruise on her wrist from where Douglas had grabbed her days before was right under his thumb. I saw her wince. I said smile, Henderson growled. I was already moving. I was walking down the stairs, my steps silent on the carpet. But I was not fast enough to stop what happened next. My mother twisted her arm, pulling away with a strength Henderson did not expect. He lost his balance slightly, and his other hand jerked, sending his glass of red wine flying. The dark liquid arched through the air and splashed across Henderson's gray suit and onto the pristine white rug that Douglas had mortgaged his watch collection to clean. The room went silent. You clumsy witch! Henderson roared, wiping at his chest. Look what you did! This suit cost $5,000! Douglas' face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. The deal was crumbling before his eyes. The humiliation was total. He did not see his mother being assaulted. He only saw his money disappearing. He snapped. He lunged at my mother. He did not just yell. He raised his hand. Mother, you useless senile! The slap echoed like a gunshot. It was a backhand strike, vicious and uncontrolled. It caught her on the cheek, the same cheek she used to press against his forehead when he had a fever as a child. She stumbled back, dropping the silver tray. It hit the floor with a deafening crash, scattering crystal shards everywhere. She fell to her knees, holding her face. She did not cry out. She just looked up at him with a look of absolute betrayal. Douglas stood over her, panting, his hand raised to strike again. Get her out of here! He screamed at the security guards. Drag her out and throw her in the street! I am done with her! That was the moment the world shifted. The time for games was over. The time for lessons was over. I was no longer Conrad the brother. I was no longer the gardener. I was Agent Steele. Designation Alpha. I covered the remaining 20 feet in 2 seconds. I did not run. I flowed. It was a burst of kinetic energy that the human eye struggles to track. Douglas' arm was coming down for a second blow. I intercepted it mid-air. I grabbed his wrist with my left hand. I grabbed his elbow with my right. He looked at me, his eyes widening in shock. He tried to pull away, but it was like trying to pull away from a hydraulic press. I did not say a word. I did not give a speech. I stepped in, pivoting my hips, and applied torque. I twisted his arm against the joint. I kept twisting until the anatomy could no longer sustain the pressure. Crack! The sound was wet and loud, sickeningly distinct from the breaking glass. It was the sound of the radius and ulna snapping simultaneously. Douglas' mouth opened in a silent scream before the air rushed back into his lungs, and he let out a howl that shattered the atmosphere of the party. My arm! My arm! I shoved him back. He collapsed onto the floor, cradling his broken limb, rolling in the wine and the glass. Freeze! The shout came from the doorway. 2 hired security guards, bulky men in cheap suits, were rushing me. They saw an old man in a tuxedo, and they made the fatal mistake of assuming I was frail. The first guard reached for his taser. too slow. I stepped inside his guard. I drove the heel of my palm into his solar plexus, collapsing his diaphragm. As he doubled over, gasping for air, unable to breathe, I brought my knee up. It connected with his chin, with a sound like a hammer hitting a melon. He went limp instantly, his eyes rolling back in his head. He hit the floor unconscious before his taser did. The second guard hesitated. He saw his partner drop in less than 2 seconds. He reached for his baton, trying to buy distance. I did not give him distance. I lunged forward, grabbing his lapel, pulling him off balance. I swept his legs out from under him. He hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him. Before he could scramble up, I placed my polished dress shoe on his throat. I applied just enough pressure to compress the carotid artery. Not enough to kill, just enough to let him know that death was standing on top of him. "Stay down," I whispered. The guard froze, his hands raised in surrender, terror written all over his face. 5 seconds. It had taken 5 seconds to dismantle the entire security force of the estate. I stepped back, straightening my dinner jacket. I adjusted my cufflinks, feeling the adrenaline hum in my veins like a familiar song. The silence in the room was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. The only sound was Douglas whimpering on the floor, clutching his mangled arm. 50 guests stared at me. They looked at the unconscious guard. They looked at Douglas. And then they looked at me with a new, primal respect. They realized suddenly that the wolf was not at the door. The wolf was in the room. I walked over to my mother. She was still on her knees, staring at me. Her cheek was red where Douglas had hit her, but her eyes were shining. She was not looking at a violent stranger. She was looking at her protector. I reached down, offering my hand. "Are you all right, ma'am?" I asked, my voice returning to the calm, controlled tone of a gentleman. She took my hand. I pulled her up effortlessly. "I am fine, Conrad," she said, smoothing her dress. I turned to face the crowd. I scanned the room, stopping on Mr. Henderson, the man who had started it all. He was trembling, holding his empty wine glass like a shield. "Mr. Henderson," I said. He flinched. "Why? Yes? I believe you owe the lady an apology." Henderson looked at Douglas writhing on the floor. He looked at the guards. He looked at my eyes, which were colder than the grave. "I am sorry," he stammered. "I am so sorry. I did not mean—" "Get out," I said softly. Henderson dropped his glass and ran. He did not wait for his coat. He scrambled out the door like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. His departure broke the spell. The other guests began to back away, murmuring, clutching their purses and their pearls. I looked down at Douglas. He looked up at me through tears of pain. "Who are you?" he gasped. "You are just a gardener. You are old." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my badge. The badge I had not worn in 13 years. The badge of a commander in the private sector, a man who commanded armies, not flower beds. I dropped it on his chest. It landed with a heavy metallic thud next to his broken arm. "I am the man who paid for this floor you are bleeding on," I said. I turned to the terrified crowd. "My name is Conrad Steele, CEO of Steele Global Security, and this house is now under new management." I tapped my earpiece. "Jared, clear the room. Copy that, boss. Police are entering the driveway now." The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder with every second. Blue and red lights flashed through the windows, painting the ballroom in the colors of justice. Douglas tried to crawl away, dragging his broken arm. Pamela was cowering in the corner, sobbing into her hands. I put my arm around my mother. "Come on, Mom," I said. "Let us go get some ice for your face." We walked past the wreckage of the party, past the broken glass, past the broken men. We walked up the grand staircase together, leaving the chaos below. For the first time in 13 years, The master of the house was finally home. The ballroom was in chaos. The air was thick with the scent of fear and spilled alcohol. Douglas lay on the floor, clutching his shattered arm, his face a mask of agony and disbelief. The guests were huddled against the walls like sheep waiting for the slaughter. And in the center of it all stood Pamela. She was trembling, but her arrogance had not yet been completely extinguished. She fumbled with her phone, her fingers slick with sweat. She dialed emergency services, screaming into the receiver with a shrill, piercing voice that grated on my nerves. "Officer, help! There is a maniac in my house. He has a gun. He just broke my husband's arm. Send everyone. Send the SWAT team. He is going to kill us all." She hung up and pointed a manicured finger at me. Her eyes were wild. "You are finished, Conrad," she shrieked. "Do you hear me? Finished. The police are 5 minutes away. You will rot in prison for this. You assaulted a homeowner. You are just a violent, washed-up old man with a fake badge." I did not move. I did not run. I simply reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a silver cigarette case. I did not smoke, but I kept it for moments like this. I opened it and took out a small encrypted earpiece, placing it back in my ear. "Let them come, Pamela," I said calmly. "In fact, I insist." Suddenly, the room began to vibrate. It started as a low hum rattling the crystal chandelier above our heads. Then it grew louder. The champagne glasses on the tables began to dance, clinking together in a rhythmic warning. The guests looked around in confusion. This was not the sound of a police siren. Sirens wail. This was a thumping, a deep rhythmic beating that shook the very foundation of the house. Wind began to whip through the open doors, tearing at the curtains, sending napkins flying like white surrender flags. A blinding white light cut through the darkness of the night outside, illuminating the entire backyard with the intensity of a second sun. It swept across the terrified faces of the guests, blinding them momentarily. "What is happening?" someone screamed. "Is it an earthquake?" No. It was not an earthquake. A massive black shape rose from behind the tree line, hovering over the lawn like a bird of prey. It was a Sikorsky S-76 tactical helicopter, painted in matte black, with no markings other than a silver shield logo on the tail. The downwash flattened Douglas prize-winning rose bushes in seconds, tearing the petals off and sending them swirling into the air. At the same time, the front gates exploded inward. Not from a bomb, but from the sheer force of a heavily armored Bearcat vehicle ramming through the iron bars as if they were made of spaghetti. Tires screeched on the gravel. Doors flew open. Men poured out. They were not local police. They were not county sheriffs. They were clad in full tactical gear, black body armor, ballistic helmets, and night vision goggles flipped up on their foreheads. They moved with a fluid, lethal precision that made the local SWAT team look like amateurs. They swarmed the ballroom, entering through the French doors and the main entrance simultaneously. Green laser sights swept the room, scanning for threats. "Drop your weapons! Get on the ground!" The guests screamed and dropped to the floor, covering their heads. Even Mr. Henderson, the arrogant buyer, was cowering under a table, whimpering like a child. Pamela stood frozen in the center of the room. She looked at the men in black gear. She looked at the assault rifles. A twisted smile appeared on her face. She thought they were her saviors. She thought her hysterical phone call had summoned this army. "Over here!" she yelled, waving her arms frantically. "He is over here! The old man in the tuxedo! Arrest him! Shoot him!" She ran toward the lead operative, a tall man with broad shoulders and a terrifying stillness about him. She grabbed his tactical vest, trying to pull him toward me. "Did you hear me? Take him down! He is dangerous!" The operative did not even look at her. He simply brushed her hand away, as if she were a nuisance fly. He kept walking straight toward me. Pamela stumbled back, shocked. "What are you doing?" "I am the victim here. That man is a criminal. He is a gardener." The operative stopped 3 feet in front of me. He snapped his heels together. The sound echoed in the silent room. He raised his gloved hand in a crisp, sharp salute. Target secured, Commander. The perimeter is locked down. Local law enforcement has been intercepted and told to stand down. This is now a federal jurisdiction operation under the Steel Global Charter. I returned the salute slowly, casually. At ease, Jared. Jared removed his helmet, revealing his face. He looked at Pamela, who was standing there with her mouth open, catching flies. Then he looked at Douglas, who was still moaning on the floor. Jared smirked. A cold, professional smirk. Sorry for the noise, boss. We had to make an entrance. You wanted a statement, right? I nodded. A statement is exactly what I wanted. Pamela looked back and forth between us, her brain trying to process the impossibility of the scene. Boss, she whispered. Why are you calling him boss? He is nobody. He is Conrad. He sleeps in the basement. Jared turned to her. His voice was like gravel. Ma'am, the man you have been treating like a servant is Conrad Steele. He is the founder and CEO of Steel Global Security. We provide protection for heads of state high-value intelligence assets and 3 sovereign nations. We have 4,000 operatives worldwide. He paused, letting the numbers sink in. Commander Steele is not a gardener. He is not a drifter. His personal net worth is estimated at $400 million. And this team? We do not answer to the police, we answer to him. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Pamela's face drained of all color. She looked like a ghost. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. She saw the tuxedo that fit too perfectly. She saw the command in my posture. She saw the way these armed men looked at me with absolute reverence. 400 million? She stammered. Douglas stopped moaning. He pushed himself up on his good arm, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. The pain of his broken bone was momentarily forgotten, replaced by the agonizing realization of what he had done. Conrad? Douglas rasped. Is that true? I walked over to him. I stood over my brother, looking down from a great height. I crouched down so my face was level with his. I tried to tell you, Douglas, I said softly. I told you I sent money. I told you I was working. But you were too busy stealing pennies to realize you were sitting on a gold mine. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the deed to the house. The original deed. You tried to sell my house for $6 million because you owe $80,000 to a bookie. I laughed, a low, dark sound. Douglas, $80,000 while I am eating breakfast. I stood up and turned to Jared. Show them. Jared nodded. He signaled to one of the men who was carrying a large metal briefcase. The man stepped forward and placed the case on a table, shoving aside the expensive hors d'oeuvres. He opened it. Inside were stacks of files, thick legal documents stamped with government seals. Jared picked up the first file. This is a record of the illegal prescription drugs you have been administering to Beatrice Steele for the last 5 years. That is a Class A felony, attempted murder by chemical poisoning. He picked up the second file. This is the forensic accounting of the trust fund. Wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. You stole $2.4 million intended for your mother's care and gambled it away on online poker and bad investments. He picked up the third file. And this is the pièce de résistance, the forged death certificate of Conrad Steele. You declared a living man dead to bypass estate laws. That is fraud against the state and federal government. Jared looked at Douglas and Pamela with eyes that promised no mercy. You are not just bankrupt. You are going to federal prison for the rest of your natural lives. Pamela collapsed. Her legs just gave out, and she slid down the wall, sobbing hysterically. No, no, please. We did not know. Conrad, please. We are family. Family? I repeated the word, tasting the bitterness of it. I walked over to my mother. She was standing by the fireplace watching the scene unfold. She did not look surprised. She looked vindicated. I took her hand. "This is my family," I said. "The woman you drugged. The woman you made scrub floors. The woman you were going to throw into a state home to die." I looked at the guests who were still cowering on the floor. "Get out," I said. They did not need to be told twice. They scrambled for the doors, stepping over the broken glass, running past the armed guards, fleeing into the night. Only the four of us remained. Me, my mother, and the two people who had tried to destroy us. "Jared," I said. "Yes, Commander. Take the trash out." Jared gestured to his men. Two operatives moved forward. They hauled Douglas up by his good arm, ignoring his screams of pain. Two others grabbed Pamela, who was kicking and screaming, dragging her across the marble floor she loved so much. "Where are you taking us?" Douglas yelled. "You cannot do this. I have rights." I watched them being dragged toward the door. "You have the right to remain silent, Douglas. I suggest you use it. You are going to a black site holding facility until the FBI arrives to process you in the morning. Enjoy the ride. The seats in the van are metal. No heating." They were dragged out into the night. The heavy doors slammed shut behind them, echoing with a finality that felt like the closing of a tomb. The room was quiet. The helicopter engine whined down outside. I looked at my mother. She looked at the soldiers standing guard. She looked at the ruined party. Then she looked at me and smiled. "You always did know how to make an entrance, Conrad." I smiled back, feeling the weight of 13 years lift off my shoulders. "I told you, Mom," I said. "Steels do not break. We just reload." The room was quiet now, except for the low hum of the tactical equipment and the pathetic sobbing of my sister-in-law. The guests had fled, leaving behind a wasteland of spilled wine and broken crystal, but the real mess was still in the room, waiting to be cleaned up. Douglas sat on the floor, cradling his broken arm, his face gray with shock. Pamela was huddled near the fireplace, her expensive silver gown ruined. I nodded to Jared. He stepped forward and placed a small, rugged drive onto the console that controlled the massive projection screen Douglas had set up. This screen was supposed to play a montage of the estate's history, a marketing tool to sell our home to foreign investors. Instead, it flickered to life with a very different kind of movie. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. On the screen, a high-definition video began to play. It was grainy at first, then sharpened into focus. It showed the kitchen. It showed Pamela standing at the counter 2 days ago. The timestamp in the corner read 4:12 p.m. The audio was crystal clear. We could hear the rhythmic grinding sound of the mortar and pestle. We watched as she shook the white pills into the bowl. We watched her grind them into dust and mix them into the tea. Pamela looked up at the screen and screamed, "Turn it off! That is illegal! You cannot record me in my own home!" "It is not your home, Pamela," I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria. "And in the state of New York, recording a crime in progress is perfectly admissible evidence, especially when authorized by the legal owner of the property." On the screen, the video Pamela spoke. Her voice echoed in the silent ballroom. "That should keep the old bat quiet. Sleep tight, Beatrice." I looked at Douglas. He was staring at the screen, his mouth open. He looked at his wife with a mixture of horror and confusion. You told me it was herbal supplements," Douglas whispered. "You told me the doctor prescribed them." Pamela scrambled backward. "He is lying, Douglas. It was just a sleeping aid. She needed sleep." Jared pressed a button on a remote. The image changed. It was a document. A chemical analysis report from a private lab. "This is the toxicology report from the residue found in the mortar." Jared announced, his voice flat and professional. "Thorazine, 200 milligrams. Combined with the other sedatives found in her bloodstream, this is a lethal cocktail. It is not a sleeping aid. It is a chemical lobotomy." Jared looked at the police officers who had just entered the room behind my team. Officers, that is attempted murder in the second degree, conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm against a vulnerable adult. The police captain, a grim-faced man who had seen enough, stepped forward. He gestured to his officers. "Cuff her." 2 officers moved in. They grabbed Pamela by her arms. She kicked and screamed, her heels scraping against the marble floor. "No, you cannot do this. I am a victim. Douglas made me do it. It was his idea." Douglas did not defend her. He just slumped further against the wall, defeated. But we were not done. Jared clicked the remote again. The screen changed to a series of financial spreadsheets, rows and rows of numbers illuminated in red. Douglas Steele. Jared read from a file. "Over the last 7 years, you have systematically drained the family maintenance fund. You forged Beatrice Steele's signature on 34 separate checks. You liquidated her retirement portfolio. And you took out 3 predatory loans against the equity of this house using a power of attorney that was revoked 13 years ago." Douglas looked up. "Revoked? That is impossible. Mom signed it over to me when you left." I stepped forward. "No, Douglas. She didn't. Because the house was never hers to give, and it certainly wasn't yours to take." I took the remote from Jared. I clicked to the next slide. It was a legal document dated 13 years ago. The header read, "The Beatrice Steele Irrevocable Living Trust." I did not just buy a house, Douglas. I created a fortress. I put this estate into a blind trust. Mom is the beneficiary. I am the trustee. But the legal owner is the trust itself. I leaned in closer so he could see the truth in my eyes. "Even if I died, even if Mom died, you would not inherit a single brick. The trust documents state clearly that in the event of our deaths, the property is to be donated to the Wounded Warrior Project." Douglas' face crumbled. The realization hit him like a physical blow. All his scheming, all his plotting, the fake death certificate he had filed, the lawyers he had bribed. It was all for nothing. He had been trying to steal smoke. "So, I own nothing?" he whispered. "You own the clothes on your back," I said. "And considering those are stained with wine and blood, I would say your net worth is currently negative." Just then there was a commotion at the front door. A police officer dragged a young man into the room. It was Justin. He had been hiding in the pool house, trying to sneak out the back gate. He was wearing a hoodie pulled low over his face, but he was sobbing. "Let me go! I did not do anything! Grandma, tell them!" The officer shoved him forward. "We found this in his pocket." The officer held up a velvet pouch. He dumped the contents into his hand. It was the sapphire brooch. My mother gasped. She touched her chest, realizing it was gone again. He must have swiped it during the chaos of the fight. Jared clicked the remote one last time. The screen showed the interior of the pawn shop from yesterday. It showed Justin handing over the brooch. It showed him taking the cash. "We recovered the item this morning," Jared said. "But the transaction was completed. That is grand larceny, trafficking in stolen goods. And since the value of the item exceeds $5,000, it is a felony." Justin looked at his father on the floor. He looked at his mother being handcuffed. He looked at me. "Uncle Conrad, please, I was just borrowing it." I looked at the boy I had once carried on my shoulders. I saw no remorse in his eyes, only fear of consequences. "You stole from the woman who raised you," I said coldly. "You laughed when she fell. You sold her memories to pay for your gambling." I turned to the police captain. "Take him." Justin screamed as the cuffs clicked onto his wrists. "Dad! Do something!" But Douglas could do nothing. He was being lifted up by 2 paramedics, his broken arm splinted, but his freedom gone. Jared walked over to Douglas. He handed him a single piece of paper. This is a restraining order, effective immediately. You are not to come within 500 feet of Beatrice Steele or this property. If you do, you will be arrested for violating a federal protection order. Douglas looked at me one last time before they hauled him away. You ruined us, Conrad. He spat. You destroyed your own family. I looked at him, and then I looked at my mother standing tall and safe for the first time in years. I did not destroy this family, Douglas. I saved it. I just cut out the cancer. The police led them out. Pamela screaming threats. Justin crying for his lawyer. Douglas silent and broken. The heavy oak doors closed behind them. The sirens wailed into the night, fading as they drove away toward the county lockup. The room was suddenly very quiet. I exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding for 13 years. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Jared signaled his team. The men in black tactical gear began to file out, disappearing as quickly and silently as they had arrived. I was left alone in the ruin of the ballroom with my mother. She stood in the center of the room looking at the empty door. She looked at the shattered crystal on the floor. She looked at the screen where the evidence of her betrayal was still frozen. Then she turned to me. "Is it over?" she asked softly. I walked over to her. I took her hands in mine. They were rough from years of scrubbing floors, but they were warm. "Yes, Mom. It is over. The house is yours. The money is yours. And they can never hurt you again." She looked around the massive empty room. "It is too big," she said. "It is too quiet." "We can sell it," I said. "We can buy a cottage by the sea. Or we can travel. You always wanted to see Italy again." She smiled, and for the first time it was a real smile, a smile that reached her eyes. "Italy sounds nice," she said. "But first, Conrad." "Yes? I think I would like a cup of tea. A real cup of tea. And maybe a pair of shoes that do not have tape on them." I laughed. It was a rusty sound, but it felt good. "I think we can arrange that." I put my arm around her and led her out of the ballroom, away from the memories of the pain. We walked toward the kitchen, leaving the lights on behind us. The war was over. The soldier was home. And justice. Justice tasted sweeter than any wine Douglas had ever bought. The heavy iron gates of the estate slammed shut with a finality that echoed like a prison door closing. Douglas stood on the cold asphalt of the public road. He was shivering violently. His tuxedo shirt was torn and stained with red wine that looked like dried blood in the moonlight. His right arm was splinted, improvised by the paramedics before they handed him his release papers, but the pain was throbbing in rhythm with his heartbeat. He watched the red taillights of the police cruisers fade into the distance, carrying his wife and son away. Pamela to a holding cell for attempted murder. Justin to a detention center for grand larceny. And Douglas was left here. Nowhere. He patted his pockets frantically with his good hand. Empty. No phone. No wallet. No keys to the Porsche that was sitting dead in the driveway inside. He had nothing. He was a man who had woken up thinking he was a king about to sell his kingdom and was going to sleep a beggar with less than 0 to his name. I stood on the other side of the gate. I looked through the black iron bars at the man I had shared a bunk bed with as a child. The man I had protected from bullies in the schoolyard. Now he was the bully, and I was the wall he had crashed into. Douglas gripped the bars with his good hand, his face pressed against the metal. "Conrad, wait. Please. You cannot leave me here. It is freezing. I have a broken arm. I have nowhere to go. The banks took my apartment. My cards are locked. I do not even have money for a bus." I looked at him. I searched my heart for a flicker of pity. I searched for that brotherly instinct that usually overrides logic. But I found nothing. I felt the same detached clinical observation I felt when looking at a neutralized target in the field. "You have 2 legs, Douglas," I said, my voice flat. "Start walking." "Walking? Where? To the city? It is 30 miles away." "Then you better start now. It will keep you warm." "Conrad, please." He sobbed, sliding down the bars until he was kneeling on the pavement. "I am your brother. Blood is thicker than water." "You said that. You used to say that all the time." I stepped closer to the gate. The security lights cast long shadows across my face. "Blood is thicker than water." I agreed. "But you are not blood anymore, Douglas. You are a parasite. And I just surgically removed you." I turned my back on him. "Conrad, do not turn your back on me. I will sue you. I will find a lawyer. I will take everything back." I stopped. I did not turn around. I simply spoke over my shoulder one last time. "Good luck with that, Douglas. But I should warn you. The lawyer you are thinking of calling? He works for me too." I walked away up the long, winding driveway, lined with the trees my father planted. Behind me, I heard Douglas screaming my name into the darkness. Then the screaming turned to sobbing. And finally, as I reached the warmth of the front porch, the only sound left was the wind howling through the empty road. He was alone with his consequences. He had spent his life stepping on people to get to the top. Now he was at the bottom, and there was no one left to catch him. I opened the front door and stepped inside, closing it firmly against the night. I locked the deadbolt. The click of the lock was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The past was locked out. The future was inside, waiting in the kitchen with a cup of tea. The sun streamed through the bay windows of the breakfast nook, washing the room in a clean, bright light that felt entirely new. For 13 years, this room had been shrouded in heavy velvet curtains because Douglas claimed the sunlight faded the furniture. I had pulled them all open at dawn. The house smelled of fresh brewing coffee and sizzling bacon, erasing the lingering stench of stale cigar smoke and deception. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table. I was not wearing the gardener's rags, and I was not wearing the tuxedo. I was wearing a simple flannel shirt and jeans. I was just a son waiting for his mother. I heard footsteps in the hall. They were not the shuffling, dragging steps of a drugged woman in taped shoes. They were steady, rhythmic steps. Beatrice walked into the room. She was wearing a soft blue cardigan and gray slacks, clothes she had retrieved from the back of her closet, where Pamela had hidden them. Her hair was brushed loose, framing her face in a silver halo. But the most striking change was her eyes. The fog was gone completely. They were sharp, clear, and filled with a peace I had not seen since I was a boy. She stopped at the doorway, looking at the table set with fine china and fresh fruit. She looked at the chair to my right, the seat of honor. For 13 years, she had been banished to the basement, forced to eat leftovers on a wobbly stool while her tormentors feasted here. "Is this for me?" she asked, her voice steady. "It is all for you, Mom," I said, standing up to pull out her chair. She sat down slowly, running her hand over the smooth wood of the table. She looked out the window at the garden, where the crushed roses were already being pruned by a new landscaping crew I had hired an hour ago. "It is so quiet," she whispered. "No screaming, no demands, no fear." I poured her a cup of coffee. Real coffee, dark and rich, not the watered-down slop Douglas allowed her to have. "They are gone, Mom, and they are not coming back." She took a sip, closing her eyes as the warmth spread through her chest. She looked at me over the rim of the cup. "Conrad," she said, "I remember everything now. I remember the lies. I remember the pills. But mostly, I remember waiting. I waited every day for you. I reached across the table and took her hand. I am sorry it took so long. She squeezed my fingers. You came when it mattered. You saved me from the dark. We ate in silence for a while. It was a comfortable silence. The kind of silence that only exists as bonds between two people who have fought a war and won. I watched her eat with an appetite that had been suppressed for a decade. She was not just feeding her body, she was reclaiming her life, bite by bite. After breakfast, she stood up and walked to the French doors. She looked out at the vast estate that was finally legally hers. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Whatever you want." I joined her at the window. "We have the time. We have the resources." She turned to me and smiled. The sapphire brooch was pinned to her cardigan, catching the morning sun. "I think I want to plant new roses," she said. Douglas hated roses. He said they were too much work. But I like them. They have thorns. They know how to defend themselves. I laughed. Roses it is. I looked at my mother standing there, strong and free. I realized then that the mission was not just about punishment. It was about restoration. I had spent my life in the shadows thinking justice was a bullet or a prison cell. But true justice was this: a quiet breakfast, a sunny window, and a mother who knew she was loved. People say revenge is a dish best served cold. They are wrong. Revenge is hollow. What we got was justice. And justice might come late. It might take 13 years and travel halfway across the world, but when it finally arrives, it pays out with interest. I am Conrad Steele. I came home to find a tragedy, and I turned it into a victory. To everyone listening out there, watch your circle closely. Protect the ones who raised you, and never underestimate the power of a son who has nothing left to lose. If you enjoyed this story of justice served, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven Douglas, or would you have left him at the gate just like I did? Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes open.